Welcome back to the Evaluation for Impact seminar for our final discussion. And my name is Pirjo Hamari. I'm from the Finnish Heritage Agency, working as a director of a department, and I'm the leader of this MOI project, together with our team here at the Finnish Heritage Agency and all of our partners from the MOI project. It's been a very important day for us, this discussion with the Nordic museum professionals, and extremely interesting and important discussions, presentations and insights have been presented today. So I'm really happy with the discussions that we've had. And luckily, we still have some time to further reflect on the project. And please remember to use the questions and answers functionality in the Zoom to give us your final feedback in this discussion. And I would also like to remind you in advance that when we are sending you a feedback questionnaire, please remember to answer to that, respond to that as well, because all of this provides us with invaluable information for the development of the future European evaluation framework for self-evaluation. And all of this feedback is highly appreciated by our project. But now it would be time to take a look at what has been discussed today, and I will start by saying some words about the early part of this project before early part of the presentations today, before we go into the actual discussions in the working groups. I hope all of you had the possibility to listen to the presentations at the beginning of this seminar. But just as a reminder, the day was opened by Leena Tokila from the Finnish Museums Association, outlining what this day is about, how we can look at impact in museums, and how this project is approaching the concept and what our aim is to create. And the aim is to create a tool of self-assessment, a critical self-reflection for museums that help the museums towards increasing their impact in society. Marianne Koski and Eva Teräsvirta from the Finnish Heritage Agency, partners in the project, presented a short summary of what the MOI Museums of Impact project is about. And the aim of the project is, like you heard, is to create a self-assessment model for European museums that has impact as its core and facilitates the competence development and strategic thinking development in museums. And the whole concept of self-evaluation as a tool is based on the concept of developmental evaluation. And we had Petri Uusikylä helping us understand what's developmental evaluation in the context of evaluation is. It's one of the types of evaluation you can do, and all evaluations have development in their backbone, so to say. Have development as their goal, but developmental evaluation in particular helps you understand situations with complexity and helps you develop your activities. We had a presentation from Miikka Kumpulainen from the Museum of Central Finland, one of the museums who has in Finland made use of the self-evaluation model that is available nationally here. And he provided us with one example of what a museum organization can experience when it does a self-evaluation. Miikka was concentrating on three types of different benefits or categories of benefits that can be had as an institution from self-evaluation: a work community perspective, a work development perspective, and even a strategic perspective, a shared goals perspective for museums. As we are talking about impact and museums in one single sentence, of course, it's very important for us also to understand what the current approaches and understanding of museums in the field of impact are, and what kind of operators museums are in the society, and where the critical interfaces of impact, societal impact with museum operations are. And we had a really good panel discussion regarding the role of museums in society and what kinds of change makers museums can be. The panel was led by Susanna Pettersson from the Nationalmuseet in Sweden, National Museum in Sweden. And as participants, we had Gudbrandur Benediktsson from Iceland, Olof Amelin from Sweden, and Niklas Kärrhalmi also from Sweden. A really important discussion about the role of museums today, and sometimes even challenging positions museums find themselves in this discussion, but also about the possibilities that the discussants or panelists could see in this context. Museums are vital for society is something that was shared, a view that was shared by all panelists, and I believe most of the participants as well. Our challenge as a field of operation or a sector is making it evident that this is a societal force. Museums are a change maker in society, but we sometimes lack the tools to make this evident or even argument strongly about this. And what MOI project or our development model is to provide one part of this discussion of the meaning and position of museums in society is. The panel was talking strongly in favor of museums as vital elements in the non-formal education field, in support of democracy, for example, about lifelong learning and the reliability of museums as sources of information. Truthfulness was something that was felt very strongly, was one of the really strong elements of museums as societal operators. And as strength, that's something that we need to build on and make sure that this reliability is not lost. We were talking a lot about how to build on this and how to continue this element of reliability, for example, through connections to research community, and also focusing and keeping the integrity of the information that museums handle, produce, and also disseminate to their environments. There was a question asked that was really pertinent, I felt, by Niklas Kärrhalmi, is how to stay relevant without losing our soul in this world of half-truths, false information, and also immediate gratification might be added to that. So this is a society that increasingly is looking at complex topics through simple glasses, and that's not something that can be accepted as cultural institutions. So that's something I think we as organizations can be quite active and vocal against. So maybe that's our specific brand of activism that we can well use as a superpower. And some answers were or some solutions were provided in the discussion in forms of use your networks, do collaborative work, rely on knowledge and keep that as your focus, as answers to what kinds of changes museums or what kinds of tools museums can use in this discussion. about their impacts in society. After the panel discussion, we went into smaller workshops and discussion groups with participants. We had 2 topics to discuss in these working groups, and the first session, or the first topic, was about the interfaces of museums and impact. So where do you see the critical interfaces of impact in society? And can museums be change makers in this environment? And the second topic concerned self-evaluation as a tool. How can it be used in museums as a tool for development or tool towards impact? And the other question was about possible benefits, but also challenges in using self-evaluation. And as the moderators hopefully remember, we have asked each of the moderators to make a short presentation of the key questions that were discussed in the groups. We had 3 groups all in all. And now I'm going to share a short list of the groups that we had. Just some finding to do. But due to some changes in the composition of the groups, we combined some of our discussion groups, and they were, I see there's an automatic playing going on. So we'll do it this way. That I'll stop the presentation and just show you the screen to save time. So I would ask the moderators to be ready to present some of your ideas or your thoughts about the discussions that took place in the discussion group. And the first group would actually be Steffen Backhaus and my group. So maybe I would invite Steffen to start explaining what happened in our discussion group and the topics from the first session.
Thank you, Pirjo. So our group has talked about the role of museums in society and sees the museum as a collective memory of society. And it's not just about individual museums on their own, but museums complementing each other to fulfill this task. And when it comes to audience participation, it was said that we need to realize that museums are already being used, but we have to know better why in order to improve and to become better. There was this issue of trust that was playing a big role in our discussion, and that museums should be reliable as producers of knowledge, especially in times of fake news in social media, etc. And participants from different countries agreed on that, what was quite interesting, that this is a very relevant and urgent task for museums. And while at the moment trust is still very high, establishing sustainable relationships with visitors can prevent this trust from decreasing. It was also pointed out that visitors are interested in seeing and learning about behind-the-scenes processes of museums. And we have to acknowledge that the museum is a construction, and part of this construction happens in the mind of the visitors. But it's not just all about looking at people as visitors of an exhibition. The knowledge of people related to a museum should also be integrated in the collection in order to improve the richness of the collection and to record that knowledge. So at this point, I would I would say we give to the second group, or the group of Thora and Federico, for their set of the first two questions.
Thora and Federico.
Yes. Hello. Yes, regarding the first two questions, if I just will start, maybe Federico will just jump in if he has some other thoughts. The key word in our discussion was relevance, that museums must be relevant, both by taking a more participatory role in the community, and also to implement resources to have the guests participate more. So it's like a two-way street. And museums should, they have to find numerous ways to connect with the community. That is, museums should be involving communities, even help, and help with various aspects of the museum scope. We were even talking about crowdsourcing projects like knowledge, for example. And museums should also address that the typical guest can be very diverse between museums, and the museums has to be, maybe exciting or something like that for all groups. Museums should also try to connect more with in research and academic studies. We should put some emphasis on that. What would be interesting for students, and maybe that's a good way. How are we missing some parts or groups or minorities in the society? Is that something that the academia could help us with? We also talked somewhat about the economic impact, both the economic impact, the influence of museums on the economic impact, how museums play a role in economic regard, but also how the economy can rule us, or turn us in different directions, also, as we have seen now in COVID-19. Of course, we need more research regarding that, and that is also like a quite difficult balance if museums are always running after some financial stability. It can be like very museums could be putting up some really popular exhibitions, for example, and try to deter from addressing some difficult issues. Federico, is there something else we should add to this? I'm sure we spoke about a lot of more different things.
Yeah, but I think that you provided a very good sum up of the topics that we shared with the group. So I don't think I have to add something else to the first round.
Thank you.
All right, sounds that you have a good discussion also in your group. How about Lena and Pauliina, your group discussion?
Thank you, Pirjo. Should I start, Pauliina, first, and then you could fill in the gaps, which I missed. We had a very good discussion, and it began with the notion that our question, how do you see that the museum's role in society? It was told that, oh, this is the question is all wrong. You are not supposed to ask in that way, because museums are not relevant of course they should be, but they are not relevant. But then we continue to discuss how are we able to do them relevant. But this concept of relevance came up. I think it was the most used word in that discussion, so it seemed to be very, very important for our group. For example, are museums relevant when they work as exhibition machines, where the key issue of making decisions, what kind of exhibitions are planned to organize, there is this economical value behind this idea. So does that make a museum relevant? And is it only, and is a museum relevant if it's making good exhibitions? Museums should be encouraged to work in other ways as well. So they should bring up not only nice things, but also something which is not so nice, maybe even difficult areas of life. And museums about relevance, continuing about relevance, museums should be trustworthy. I think this is the same as came up in the other groups as well. I think this was my notes for the first questions. Would you like to continue, Pauliina? Do you have?
I think you summed it up quite good. One thing I would add is that I think we discussed that every museum has to like think about their relevance from their own point of view, and who are they relevant for, and why, and things like that we also discussed. So, and I think that this evaluation tool is also a good thing for this, to thinking about the relevance of each museum from their perspective. Yeah.
That's a very good point that we somehow use as one of the key points in self-evaluation, is that it plays on your own strengths as an institution. So it doesn't ask you to do something that you are not, but it asks you to do it better in the way that you are, or concentrating on your key strengths helps you recognize where those are and playing on those, which can be very particular from museum to museum. But one of the points of self-evaluation is to help you understand yourself as an institution better and have this discussion together. I guess this is a good bridge to the second part of the sessions, and maybe I'll take the first joint group for the second question, which was about developmental evaluation as a tool for museums and the benefits and challenges in using a self-evaluation tool. And maybe an overall observation, first of all, that we managed to spend quite a long time on the discussion about the benefits of the tool, and a very positive response came from the first joint group about using self-evaluation as a tool for museums in development. There's of course a million avenues a discussion can take, and we can only concentrate on some topics. So basically, first of all, we can agree that there were several unexplored avenues because the time didn't allow for touching all of the important aspects. But we talked quite a lot about this bottom-up approach and this transversal discussion in an organization where all parts of the organization should be involved in the discussion. There was a very good example. I think it was a British library work that was mentioned in our discussion about how a really big organization still could approach their internal development through a very bottom-up or inclusive approach. So this was felt. It was felt that this is one of the strengths of the model. But of course, using a bottom-up approach basically means that you have a lot of stakeholders, also internal stakeholders, which again means that the process is quite resource intensive. It takes time and it takes a lot of person hours and even efforts, and you need to have somebody to facilitate or guide the process onwards and keep it running. So this was one of the concerns maybe that was brought up in the discussion. Another point in this using self-evaluation as a tool approach, one very good point was made up, and that using all kinds of tools or having a toolkit also requires very good directions or educational material, accompanying material to allow the tool to be used in the way it's supposed to be used, and for the users to be able to make the use of the tool as simple as possible or as easy as possible. So this is something that the project needs to take up, and of course it was in the plan, but needs to keep a constant eye on how to support the museums in using the tool. Time constraints were talked about, how to make it easier time-wise to use that. And we talked about the possible modularity of the model, so it can be broken down to smaller pieces which won't take so much time and can allow the museum to concentrate on specific topics. And then we talked a lot about data-driven development. So even though we've done a lot of audience research and audience development and monitoring our operational environment, there's still a gap between our understanding about how people use museums and therefore where the effects and impacts of the museums are. And we got to be presented with some really nice examples of current projects or ongoing projects where different operators are approaching or researching how museums are used by their audiences and what are the changes that are brought by the exposure to different museum activities. So all these, this was a very interesting topic, and of course from our point of view now the question is how to incorporate this into the evaluation model in the sense that these kinds of topics are made visible in a self-evaluation. And this can of course happen, for example, through evaluation questions that ask your museum to identify whether you use methodologies like this and whether they are in standard use, and whether the results that you get from these kinds of analyses of your audiences are fed back to the development of operations. And this is how a self-evaluation model can respond to these kinds of needs in museum operations. This was perhaps a very brief summary. Stefan, do you have any additional points you want to raise from our discussions?
No, you summed it up quite well. Thank you.
And of course, after the summary, we will open the general discussion so people who participated in the discussion can further highlight any points that they want to make, that they want to make public from the discussions or highlights for all the audience. So let's proceed to the next group. So Thora and Federico, how about self-evaluation as a tool?
Yes, our points in this the discussion is how it could possibly help the museums. The evaluation tools should be consistently evaluate the museum activities and help the museum to go into the right direction. It could help with connecting with the right audiences, and of course we were a little bit, our discussion was like a continuance of what we had discussed in session 1. So it always, you know, we were always talking about relevance and how to connect with the audience or the guest. And helping how to get feedback. That is also, you know, somebody, and I think Helga Mori in our group said, you know, is anybody out there, you know, as we sometimes think. And help you maybe connect to possible audiences. We talked about how museum staff often get just lost running the museum and in the admin of it all. The framework should and could help you focus again, you know, on the key issues. Why do you have this museum? What is the purpose of it? You know, I think that it could help a lot. And within the museum, it could encourage dialogue, and the value is in the discussion. It could help with understanding between levels, because that is all, especially in the bigger museums, that where you have like hierarchy and also, you know, the departments are very diverse. Sometimes the understanding between museum staff is just not enough. It could break barriers within the museum also. The challenges that we saw, that maybe we will not like what we see, you know, maybe the the results are not what we like, and then we museums would either, you know, try to forget them or pretend it doesn't exist. Also, it's it could become an echo chamber, you know, we're just, you know, patting each other's back all the time, and that is also something you have to be open-minded about, you know. You have to be open-minded what the results would tell you, but you have to also be, you know, maybe a little bit harsh on yourself also when you're doing the evaluation. We talked about also here hierarchy, political and societal difference within the participating countries are sometimes, you know, it is maybe there will be a difference how the tool will be used, and there are some worries that you cannot utilize the owners or the politicians to participate in dialogue, which is maybe necessary to just for the museum to do this framework for itself. I don't know, trust must be very good within the museum, so you can, you know, wholly you have to be, I think the staff members have to have a confidence that they are trusted to with their, you know, I think that's also a bit, you know, because you have, this is not something you do anonymously. This is something that people do as a group, and, you know, there has to be good trust so everyone can participate. And also a very good point that the scale within the framework, it should be broad enough. There was some good points that if you use like a scale from 1 to 3 or 1 to 5, you miss a little bit out the gray scale of things, you know, because people have a tendency not to put a negative, you know, remarks, even though they have that. Federico, I'm sure you have some other something to add. I'm forgetting something.
I think you said most of the things. Maybe I can add something about participation and feedback. Also in this second framework, our participants in the group were very were highlighting the importance of using this kind of tool also as a mean of relation with audiences and stakeholders and other museums. For example, building a sort of networks, professional networks among museums that using the same framework can also connect and share knowledge about their institutions and their work. And then, yeah, I think most of the other things were covered by your presentation, Thora. The dialogue that we had about hierarchies and top-down or bottom-up approaches was very, I think it was very useful for our project, since we are a very diverse partnership with some Southern European partners like us in Italy and the Greek partners, and on the other way, a lot of Northern European countries where somehow hierarchies in the organizations, especially museums, are different, sometimes are a bit flatter than that we have in the southern part of Europe, but also with respect to the German situation that we were facing in the first Stakeholder Forum in some months ago, where hierarchies are still very important and very much present. So this is something I think quite useful for the development of the modularity of this kind of tool that we want to build.
Thank you very much. It all sounds very good, and we'll still have the feedback from the last group, so Leena and Pauliina again.
Would you, Pauliina, start this time so I could?
Okay. So in our group, I think we agreed that self-evaluation is a good tool for discussion within the museum, as long as it allows or it involves all professional groups in all levels. And in that way, it's a good way to discuss the museum's goals and things like that. And we also discussed that the tool should be used if there's a real will and possibility to change, and that would really motivate also the museum professionals to take part in the evaluation. I think we discussed a lot the evaluation from the point of view of the museum professional attending or the participating in the evaluation, and we discussed that it should not be an obligation, but they should have a genuine motivation to participate, and that means also that there should be time for this evaluation process, and also trust and safe environment for the discussion. Yeah, Leena, continue, please.
Oh yes, and important is to engage all staff members not just, for example, directors or other managers, even though as the hierarchy was mentioned in the previous presentation, I think still this is something we have to consider, that all are in the same boat and or are able to talk about these things and all are able to participate in evaluation process. And I think one notion was important as well in motivating in this kind of evaluation process. It is the idea of that the idea behind the evaluation is to create something new. And I think this is quite essential, because if we want to encourage people to use this kind of tool, and if they somehow from previous experiences, they sort of recognize that even they work hard in evaluation, there will be nothing changed, nothing new will be created in this process. I think that's bad for the motivation to participate in this kind of evaluation process. And also the notion that which is connected to the idea of all staff members should be participating, is that sometimes it might be the case that those who work in a very practical or take care of practical jobs are not so much heard in this kind of processes. So there are visions, there are missions, there are strategies, but maybe not those practical everyday issues, which are important as well. And I think one main thing was that the dialogue is very important in evaluating process, and we were talking about the levels. Petri mentioned the macro, meso, micro levels. That is quite the same thing, that all museum staff are involved in this process, and individual opinions are listened to. And then I think Pauliina already mentioned the atmosphere of trust is very important. I think you mentioned that, but that's what is the final idea I had written down. So that was our report.
Thank you very much to all of the moderators who reported, and also to all of the participants in the working groups, workshops, for your really valuable inputs for the project. I can already see that this is going to be very rich and complex pickings for the project. It's been said to you repeatedly that this will be very valuable for the project, but in fact we are also looking to be relevant to museums, and the only way to be relevant to museums is to address topics that are crucial to museums and their impact in society. So all this input is needed, and these stakeholder forums have in their previous versions, and also here clearly brought us very good points that need to be incorporated in one way or another in the developing model, either as parts of the evaluation questions or evaluation framework, or in the supporting structure that helps the museums do these kinds of evaluations and explain the methodology, but also the benefits or the motivation behind using these kinds of model. Maybe there's really a lot of really good points have been made, but and of course it's easy to focus on the last presentation here, but I would just repeat what Lena already pointed out, that self-evaluation is a critical look at what you do yourself, and its aim is to change something, to create something new, or change how you operate. And if this is not your motivation in going into self-evaluation, then it won't produce you the results that you are looking for, or then it's an exercise that is motivated by something else than your self motivation or your own need and will to change. And of course, evaluation sometimes carries with it this old burden of somebody coming and assessing your work. And this is something that producing this kind of evaluation model also needs to slightly fight against, is to bring the mindset of the people who use an evaluation from assessing and comparing something to your own possibility and your own motivation for development, and perhaps not branding evaluation as something positive, but explaining how it can be a really, really positive development force, but it needs your own motivation. That's the key starting point of using a self-evaluation in a museum. So all kinds of really good points have come up in the discussion. We have already exceeded our time a bit, and I've already tried to make a very general summary of what we have been talking about today, and what the Moi Museums of Impact project is aiming to do, and what kind of a support it aims to be for the museum community. I tried to stop the automatics, but clearly my technical skills weren't enough, so you'll just have to bear with that. However, the Moi Museums of project will continue. Our next phase will be to finalize the draft model that we are building into something that can be piloted in a number of museums. And of course, also, in addition to the stakeholder forums, the piloting phase will be really important in giving us feedback information about how the model will continue. And now I will come back to you in 30 seconds, because this is really irritating, and I'll stop this rollback if you just bear with me for a second. I'll make adjustments. Don't move. Maybe this is irritating me more than anybody else, so we'll see if, so this is where I need to, yes. And now it should work. I hope so. I promise I won't do anything else after, even if it doesn't work. I'll pick up where I left off, and that is the next steps of the project. Of course, we hope that you are interested in following how the development framework will develop, and the intermediate results that we get, and of course the final results will be taken into use. The easiest way of following us in what we do is to follow our Facebook page, Moi Museums of Impact. Please follow us, and please distribute information that we have there to any of your networks. We'd be happy to discuss this further with any of you who's interested in knowing more about what we do. And there you can also see who our partners are. So contacting any of these will give you more information about the project. It will take some time when we go through the results of the stakeholder forum, but there will be a public report about this. So all the discussions will be distilled and refined and produced in a public report so you can follow that, and also the presentations that were recorded will be publicly available when they are edited to a publishable format, which might take some weeks, even some months, depending on how much we have the possibility to advance with all this rich material that's been provided today. Now, just so this is my really great thanks on behalf of the Moi Museums of Impact project to all of you participating in the discussions today, to all of the presenters and all of the moderators and observers with us today who've put in their efforts on behalf of the project. Just a final check if there are any questions in the questions and answers or the chat directed towards the project, because I can't see the questions and answers when I'm sharing, and I really want to share the image where all of our partners' names are.
There are no questions or any other remarks in chat or questions or answers.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you who've been with us today, and please follow us also in the future to know how we proceed with the Moi Museums of Impact project. It was nice being with you today. Hopefully we will have a really great museum summer after all this time where our services have not been available, and let's make sure that museums stay relevant also in the future. Thank you very much, and bye bye.